Hey there everybody, Mazarok here, and today I want to discuss the new Fabulous 5, the meta composition, and while this is not a defense of the meta and only playing meta specs, this is a breakdown of why this composition is so good, and we're going to be going into quite a few details on quite a few things, but before we do get into it though, please, for the love of everything, meta specs mean nothing until you're in the highest end of keys. You can create a balanced composition with any of the specs that are currently available to play in the game. Every spec in the game has done, I think, 26s, 27s. Unless you are playing the bleeding edge of keys, really, it doesn't matter. It doesn't. Play what you need, play what you want, have fun, okay? But I am in favor of balanced compositions, and that is going to come in play in a little bit. But first, the big thing where this spec became meta. Now, obviously, going into 10.1.5, the new meta composition of Guardian Druid, Holy Paladin, Augmentation Evoker, Fire Mage, or just Mage in general, and Shadow Priest quickly became the dominant meta in Dragonflight, and very quickly. And one of those specs is brand new, and all four of those specs just got reworked. So, is it really a surprise here that that combination became good? But there's also a reason why that combination is so good. But we have to talk about the Great Push first. So the Great Push, this is what they're playing. And when you read the chat on the side, which is kind of the inspiration towards me making this video, you see, oh, the lack of the diversity in these keys is absolutely crazy, you know? And, like, basically, like, this, they took our job mentality of, like, this. And then I know many people are doing it for memes, but there are many people that are actually mad at this. Now, the people that do the Great Push, the people that participate in that, are some of the best players in the world. And they put an insane, and I mean insane amount of time and practice into being able to do the highest keys in the world. And you cannot expect everyone, or many of them, to learn 38 different specs. They don't have a guild of 50 people to choose from and be like, okay, you're a warlock. Tag in for this one, guys. It's a group of 5. You have 5 people. That's all you're allowed. Right? So if you're trying to choose a composition that you can play and master the dungeons to their fullest, if you can get away with only playing one spec, that's kind of better, because that way you can absolutely master that spec to its fullest and nth degree, instead of trying to learn each having to play 6 to 7 to 8 different specs and really not being a master at it. But that's kind of that small portion there, right? Is the amount of time that goes into it. But also, these guys and girls are timing the highest keys ever. Now, Mythic Plus is an infinitely scaling damage system. So when we get people that talk about, well, why can't you just balance the game so every spec can do this? You know that's impossible, right? You can't. And that is impossible because Mythic Plus is a thing. And the way it is a thing. The keys go up exponentially and forever, right? And when you have that sort of system, specs and classes are going to start dropping off once you get to the highest end and the highest level. It's just going to happen. It's actually impossible for Blizzard to balance every spec to time the highest keys. Because let's say right now the highest keys being timed are 30-31s, right? That's the range that they're in. The problem is if you get everyone that's able to time, everyone balanced enough to time a plus 30, what the new highest key is then just jumps up to 33, 34, 35, whatever it may be, after all the other specs fall off, and the new best composition comes in and is able to do it. And that is always going to repeat itself. You cannot balance the game around every spec being able to do the highest keys ever. And sometimes they get close enough where it's a key or two off. I will admit, sometimes it's good. And this one here, I'm playing both sides here, right? I'm seeing both sides. I agree this side is a little bit more egregious, but we already talked about why, right? 4 of the specs got a rework, and one of them was introduced brand new. But Augmentation Evokers' impact on the game allowed everyone to get tankier, to get bigger, to just live, to heal better, to tanks can heal. Can you imagine tanks in those plus 30s and plus 31s right now without the armor and the primary stat buff from Augmentation Evoker? They would just topple over, making some of these keys just not possible. And whether or not you think Augmentation Evoker is good for the game because of its introduction is a whole different thing, right? That's a different conversation, and I've already kind of talked about that in a separate video and put my opinions on that. In short, I think augmentation is actually very good for the game. That sort of support spec is very, very good. The problem is right now there's only one of them, so it just highlights a beam onto this one spec that's a problem. If Blizzard's plan is to have Augmentation Evoker be the only support spec in the game, I think this is going to be very, very bad for WoW in the long run. It's not going to be good. But if they're planning on introducing a lot more, 4, 5, whatever, how many, and have some sort of variety in what support specs you can bring, I think that's actually very healthy for the long term and the health of the game and what's possible and what's doable, right? So there is that balance. Right now, I think they took a risk. They swung a bat, and I think they hit a home run with it. But that home run remains decent and good as long as they make more, right? They need to make more. If augmentation remains the only support spec in the game, I think that's really, really bad. But whatever. So, okay, now we've covered all of that. So why is the composition of Fire Mage, Shadow Priest, Augmentation Evoker, H-Pal, and a Guardian Druid, the god comp right now, the Fabulous Five, the big one, right? Now, if you follow this channel, I said that this season is literally the season of utility and dispels. So let's take a look at what this composition has to offer, right? Because you're trying to play the best composition that you can, and in the least amount of specs, because really, you kind of have to. So, you have Poison, Disease, Dispel from Paladin. Poison and Curse from Guardian Druid. It's hard to get to, admittedly, but it is doable. Disease Dispel and Mass Dispel from Shadow Priest. And we're going to talk about Mass Dispel in a bit. Remove Curse from the Mage. Poison and Bleed removal from Augmentation, okay? This is what that's what you got baseline with, well, not baseline. This is what you can grab for any one of these. So right off the bat, it doesn't matter what dungeon you go in, Poison, Disease, Curse, Bleeds, and Magic, you've got covered. And you've got them covered in multitudes, making it easy just to kind of deal with it. On the other flip side, Mass Dispel is insane and basically an absolute requirement for the dungeons after a certain level. Even in a plus 20, having a Mass Dispel at the right time makes life infinitely easier because it's just that good. It really is. Vortex Pinnacle, there's that dot that goes out that absolutely trucks from the Gust Soldiers in Brackenhide Hollow. Now, Guardian Druid doesn't have the means to be able to cheese the the Decayed Senses on the totem phase of the first boss of Brackenhide Hollow, but it can be dispelled. Shadow Priest ahoy! Mass Dispel the tank. Tank helps take down the Hextrick totem. Done. Basically, plain and simple, right? And that's if your Holy Paladin doesn't have Bubble. Okay? So Mass Dispel is huge. So whether or not they're doing damage, it's really, really good. So you have dispels for days with this composition, and we only started talking about bleeds just now, which is on a 54-second cooldown with a 10% reduction of time skip from Cauterizing Flame for Evokers. A lot of these dungeons have very nasty bleeds. Brackenhide Hollow, Halls of Infusion, Naltharis are three that just come to mind. Alderman, oh my god, Alderman. The bleeds that those things put on the tanks, the chomps, or the scent on the Sentinel boss, that does insane damage. And being able to dispel one every 54 seconds is actually huge. Then you also have the Paladin utility that comes in. You have Bob, Divine Bedazzle, aka Blinding Light. You have Sack, Bubble, your dispels, like I had said before. Aura Mastery is huge. At those level of keys, being able to reduce the amount of incoming damage is actually crazy. It applies way more to than better throughput healing, right? Because it just allows you to live so many mechanics. And then you add on the extra maximum health that you can get from the Augmentation Evoker hitting Obsidian Scales with a Black Attunement buff. And bam, you have a wonderful combination for being able to live a lot of things, right? So you just have this incredible amount of utility, and you have every dispel covered with this one composition, right? You start seeing why things work out. Now, of course, Fire Mage damage is incredible, and it requires power infusion from the Spree to really get amplified to 13. So we have Augmentation Evoker buffing Shadow Priest, buffing your healers, buffing your tanks, buffing everyone, and the Fire Mage to be able to pull off the numbers that they're pulling, to be able to live the numbers that they're pulling, and be able to heal the numbers that they're pulling, right? Because just the amount that Augmentation Evoker does for the game is a whole different thing. But when you start adding all these little bits of utility and all of the stops and everything, I'm not going to go over the list of all the stops that they all have, but you just got everything covered. With that group, Fire Mage, by the way, likes having their own lust, and they can double lust. So Augmentation Evoker going to be the main lust, and then the Mage can lust on top of, double dipping and getting the effects of both at the same time. And once you start seeing all of the synergies with everything that can be done and everything with this one group, it makes sense, right? Why would you run anything else? Because the moment you pick apart a piece of this puzzle, you can lose 3% verse from the bear. You lose the 3% damage reduction from Aura Mastery, the 5% Fortitude, the 5% Intellect, augmentations, everything. The moment you start picking apart this composition, it really starts The moment you start picking apart this composition, it really starts to kind of break itself down. You're not just losing a tank, you're losing a 3% verse buff, which is a lot bigger than what you may think. But that is the short and sweet of it. What I wanted to do here is just highlight why the spec is so good. Each one represents a gem in the Infinity Gauntlet, right? On their own merits, they're all very strong. But when you combine the 5 together, they just have an answer for everything. So why would you swap away from it in the highest of the bleeding edge keys? It makes literally no sense. You have every dispel covered, you have bleed removal, you have lust and double lust, and more health, and whatever it is, there's just an answer to it. So why? Right? Doesn't make any sense. Now, this isn't a defense of why Blizzard hasn't nerfed some of these specs. Personally, I still think Fire Mage absolutely needs a tuning down. They are just absolutely wild. I think Bear's in a really good spot. They are strong, but I think the other tanks aren't far behind. It's just tanks tend to all fold right to the best one, and very, very quickly. This is a trend that's happened every single season I've ever seen. Literally every single season. I don't know why, but the moment there's one tank that's just clearly 1% better than the other, it's just 50% of the tank population just kind of folds over, but whatever. H-Pal, the healer population loves Holy Paladin. It's what it is. Like, I don't know, like, Preservation Evoker could have been the meta, and most of the healer population, from what I've seen, would have been like, well, I'm going to stick with my healer of choice. But for some odd reason, when it's Holy Paladin, everyone goes right to Holy Paladin. That's been very common. I've seen that a lot. I don't know. I guess a lot of people just like Holy Paladin. I don't have an explanation for that one. And, keys are the keys. But if you're new to this game, play whatever spec you want. And don't worry about the meta. Don't worry about chasing the meta until you're in the 0.1%. That's the video for you guys today. Have yourself a good one. Bye.